Welcome to Sunday School Lesson at a Glance, a ministry of the Sunday School Publishing Board, where we focus on teaching, engaging, application, and learning for teachers and students.
I will be sharing highlights and key points from the Adult Faith Pathway Bible Study Sunday School book and the Townsend Press Sunday School Commentary based on the International Lesson Series. This week, we begin our fall quarter of Sunday School lessons. The title of this quarter study is Worship in the Covenant Community. The lessons of this quarter comprise a study of worship practices offered as a grateful response to the covenant relationship that God initiated, first with Abraham and later with the people of Israel. The patterns of worship reflect the gamut of community life, from praising God's goodness and mercy to calling on God for help in times of crisis. Unit 1, entitled Leader Set Worship Example, begins with the example of Abraham, who built altars to mark those occasions on which God called him to greater faithfulness. Get your Sunday School book, Bible, notepad, pen, or device and follow along as we take a glimpse into this week's Sunday School lesson. Now let's get started with this wonderful lesson. The lesson title for this week, September the 1st, is Marking Transitions, and this is the title in the adult book. The title in the Sunday School commentary is Abram Builds an Altar at Mamre. The background scripture is Genesis chapter 12 and chapter 13, and the print passage is Genesis chapter 13, verses 8 through 18. The key verse in this week's lesson is, Abram went to live near the great trees of Mamre at Hebron, where he pitched his tents. There he built an altar to the Lord. And that's Genesis chapter 13, verse 18, the New International Version. Here are 3 questions to consider and reflect on as we go through this week's lesson. Question number 1. Why did Abram allow Lot to choose which land he would inhabit? Question number 2. When did God repeat his promise to Abram? And question number 3. What did God instruct Abram to do after Abram and Lot departed? Let's take a brief look at the lesson biblical context. This week's lesson is in the book of Genesis, and the author is Moses. The main characters in this week's lesson are Abram and Lot. God selected Abram as the human instrument through whom he would bless humankind and ultimately bring salvation to dying sinful humanity. God did this by establishing a covenant with Abram. God instructed Abram, who later became known as Abraham, to leave his homeland and journey to the land of Canaan. In Genesis chapter 12, verses 1 through 3, starting with verse 1, reads, The Lord had said to Abram, Leave your country, your people, and your father's household, and go to the land I will show you. Verse 2, I will make you into a great nation, and I will bless you. I will make your name great, and you will be a blessing. Verse 3, I will bless those who bless you, and whoever curses you, I will curse. And all peoples on earth will be blessed through you. This event marks the beginning of patriarchal history in Genesis, focusing on Israel's earliest ancestors. Abram obeyed God's command and set out for Canaan. At that time, there was a severe famine in the land of Canaan. And as a result of the famine, Abram left the promised land and went to Egypt, where there was food. Abram feared that the Egyptians would kill him because his wife Sarah was a beautiful woman, and they would want her as a wife. So Abram asked Sarah to tell everyone that she was his sister. Chapter 12, verse 14 reads, When Abram came to Egypt, the Egyptians saw that Sarah was a very beautiful woman. Verse 15, And when Pharaoh's officials saw her, they praised her to Pharaoh, and she was taken into his palace. Verse 16, He treated Abram well for her sake, and Abram acquired sheep and cattle, male and female donkeys, male and female servants, and camels. Verse 17, But the Lord inflicted serious diseases on Pharaoh and his household because of Abram's wife Sarai. Verse 18, So Pharaoh summoned Abram. What have you done to me? He said. Why didn't you tell me she was your wife? Verse 19, Why did you say, she is my sister, so that I took her to be my wife? Now then, here is your wife. Take her and go. Verse 20, Then Pharaoh gave orders about Abram to his men, and they sent him on his way with his wife and everything he had. Sarah and Abram came back to the land now known as Israel. They had acquired many possessions and a great deal of wealth. After returning to the land between Bethel and Ai from Egypt, both wealthy and blessed, Abram and Lot found themselves in the same region. Their herds and flocks grew, leading to disputes among their herdsmen. As noted in chapter 13, there was quarreling and strife between the herdsmen of Abraham and Lot's livestock. The land was crowded. There was not enough land to support all of them. There was not adequate ground for grazing. To prevent further conflict, Abram proposed separation. He generously allowed Lot to choose the land he desired, and Lot selected the fertile Jordan River Valley, while Abram settled in Canaan. Despite parting ways, Abram remained faithful to God's promise, and the Lord reaffirmed his covenant with him. The lesson aims for this week's lesson are: number 1, explain the context of Abram's worship regarding altars. Lesson aim number 2, desire the spiritual maturity that develops through acknowledging God's activity in our lives. And lesson aim number 3, practice a worshipful response in recognition of God's presence and activity in the threshold moments in your life. As we continue our glimpse into this week's lesson, I'm going to share 2 key points from each outline in the lesson text and expound some on each one. There are 3 outlines presented in the Adult Faith Pathway Sunday School book in this week's lesson. The first lesson outline is a prudent proposal, and that's Genesis chapter 13, verses 8 and 9. The second lesson outline is unwise choice, and that's Genesis chapter 13, verses 10 through 13. And the third lesson outline is kept promises, and that's Genesis chapter 13, verses 14 through 18. Let's begin our analysis of the biblical text with the first lesson outline, a prudent proposal. Key point number 1, Abram proposes a plan to keep harmony and peace in the family. We will begin the first outline by reading Genesis chapter 13, verses 5 through 7. It is important that we read verses 5 through 7, the preceding verses before our lesson text, to help with understanding the context of the lesson. And again, I'm reading from the New International Version. Verse 5 reads, Now Lot, who was moving about with Abram, also had flocks and herds and tents. Verse 6. But the land could not support them while they stayed together, for their possessions were so great that they were not able to stay together. Verse 7. And quarreling arose between Abram's herders and Lot's. The Canaanites and Perizzites were also living in the land at that time. Verse 8, so Abram said to Lot, let's not have any quarreling between you and me, or between your herders and mine, for we are close relatives. And verse 9, is not the whole land before you? Let's part company. If you go to the left, I'll go to the right. If you go to the right, I'll go to the left. Lot, like Abram, had been blessed materially in livestock, silver and gold, with large herds of sheep, and it had come to the point where the land they shared for grazing would not support both of their herds. In Genesis chapter 13, verse 8, Abram told Lot, his nephew, his brother's son, that they should not be quarreling, nor should the herdsmen, since they were close relatives. In other words, Abram was saying, we are family. Let's try to resolve this issue. This can't continue. Psalm 133, verse 1, and Romans chapter 12, verse 18 remind us that we are to live at peace with everyone. Psalm 133, verse 1 reads, how good and pleasant it is when God's people live together in unity. And Romans chapter 12, verse 18, if it is possible, as far as it depends on you, live at peace with everyone. Peace within one's family is a blessed and desired state we should all strive to keep. Yes, sometimes it requires yielding to others to keep peace in the family. Keeping peace in the family should be important to us, just as it was important to Abram. Matthew chapter 5, verse 9 says, blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God. Abram wanted to keep peace between him and his nephew Lot. In keeping peace, he decided that they should go their separate ways. So in an approach to solving the issue, Abram took Lot to a location where they could view the land in different locations and different directions. He has given Lot the first choice. He is letting him take what he wants. Abram did not use his seniority to claim the better portion of the land that he and his nephew had been sharing in raising their sheep. As verse 8 reads, let's not have any quarreling between you and me, or between your herders and mine. Philippians chapter 2, verse 3 tells us, do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit. Rather, in humility, value others above yourselves. Abram suggested they separate peacefully by offering Lot the choice of whichever region he preferred for his herds. Key point number 2. Abram put Lot's wishes over his position. Abraham kindly let him have the first option. He graciously told Lot to choose the part of the land he wanted, agreeing to accept what was left. He gave Lot a choice to either go right or left, and he would choose the opposite. Abraham was willing to accept what was left or what remained. Abram showed that he wasn't greedy by allowing Lot to pick the most fertile area. Lot quickly, greedily, and selfishly claimed the best of the land, the lush, green, and well-watered parcel for himself. He showed no sensitivity to the kindness of his uncle Abram. Greed and selfishness would lead Lot to make a decision that will ultimately prove to be a big mistake. We see character represented here. A lover of peace and hater of strife, Abram, and one who was selfish, willful, unconcerned with consequences, and that was Lot. The second lesson outlined, unwise choice. Key point number 1, Lot's character is revealed by his choices. Verse 10 reads, Lot looked around and saw that the whole plain of the Jordan toward Zoar was well watered, like the garden of the Lord, like the land of Egypt. This was before the Lord destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah. Verse 11. So Lot chose for himself the whole plain of the Jordan and set out toward the east. The two men parted company. Lot surveyed the land, and he saw its beauty and fruitfulness. He liked what he saw. He chose the entire land of Jordan, which was near Sodom and Gomorrah. The land he chose was fertile and lush, with green grass, flowing streams of water, as we read in the scripture. It was rich, productive, promising great wealth for the sheep owner, needing good pasture and grazing. It looked beautiful and perfect. It was a beautiful area. This was before God destroyed Sodom. Key point number 2. Lot made decisions based solely on material gain. He made his selection on what he could see. We are to walk by faith and not by sight. Verse 12. Abram lived in the land of Canaan, while Lot lived among the cities of the plain and pitched his tents near Sodom. Verse 13. Now the people of Sodom were wicked and were sinning greatly against the Lord. Abram and Lot went their separate ways, with Abram settling in Canaan while Lot chose to live near Sodom. Abram walked by faith and Lot walked by sight. The land Lot chose was itself good. It was good land. However, the neighbors bordering it were not spiritually suitable for Lot. His chosen land bordered Sodom, but he did not consider that factor. The culture of Sodom was inherently unjust and went against the principles of righteousness. Lot would later move into the city of Sodom. The sins of the people of Sodom and Gomorrah were so strong that God was determined to destroy both cities, as recorded in Genesis chapter 18, verses 16 through 33. The third lesson outline: kept promises. Key point number 1. The Lord visited Abram after Lot left. Verse 14. The Lord said to Abram, after Lot had parted from him, "Look around from where you are, to the north and south, to the east and west." Verse 15. All the land that you see I will give to you and your offspring forever. God is repeating his promise to Abraham. After Lot left with his family and possessions, God told Abram to look in every direction. Upon seeing all this land, his children's descendants would possess it forever. Key point number 2. God promised to give Abraham and his offspring all the land he could see. And he emphasized that this promise would last forever. Verse 16. I will make your offspring like the dust of the earth, so that if anyone could count the dust, then your offspring could be counted. The Lord also promised that Abram's descendants would be as numerous as the dust of the earth. Can you imagine trying to count all the dust particles? Dust is something that keeps coming. It keeps coming. God told Abram that he would have many children, many offspring. The number of his descendants would be limitless. If he could count the particles of dust, which are too infinite, that would be how many offspring he would have. By using the terms forever and beyond numbering, the Lord confirmed his original promises to Abraham. At this juncture in his life, Abram and Sarah did not have any children. They had no offspring. But Abram trusted God with the outcome. God selected Abram, whose name will be later changed to Abraham, meaning father of many. He would be the human instrument through whom God would bless humankind. and ultimately bring salvation to dying, sinful humanity. God did this by establishing a covenant with Abraham. The essence of that covenant is that God would make a great nation of Abram's descendants, make Abram's name great, bless those who blessed Abram, and curse those who cursed Abram. Abram was instructed by the Lord to travel throughout the land rather than settling down in one place. Verse 17, go walk through the length and breadth of the land, for I am giving it to you. Abram was instructed by the Lord to travel throughout the land rather than settling down in one place. He was to walk the entire length and width of the land. This was a way for him to claim the land for himself. Verse 18, so Abram went to live near the great trees of Mamre at Hebron, where he pitched his tents. There he built an altar to the Lord. Abram then moved his tents and settled near the great trees of Mamre in Hebron. Mamre refers to an Amorite who resided near Hebron, and we can read this in Genesis chapter 14, verse 13 and verse 24. He owned the place known as the Great Trees of Mamre, the Amorite. And Abram built an altar to honor God. The altar at Mamre was a confirmation of the promises of God. Abram would build several altars during his lifetime and travels. Each altar he built represented a personal encounter he had with God. Altars also represented a form of taking possession of the land upon which they were erected. In this case, Abram would be laying claim to the divinely promised land. Despite some shortcomings, Abram remained faithful to God. As a result, God rewarded him with more promises and more blessings. God blessed Abraham because of his faithfulness. Abram remained faithful to God's call, and God kept his promises to him. God never cancels or fails in his promises to those who remain faithful to him. In summary, God made a promise to Abraham and reinforced that promise in this week's lesson. Abram remained faithful to God's promise, and the Lord reaffirmed his covenant with him. Abram was fatherless at the time, but Abram trusted God. We are to walk by faith and not by sight, trusting God. Another lesson to glean from Genesis chapter 13 centers on showing wise decision-making, generosity, and faithfulness in conflict. Abram's approach to resolving the conflict with Lot's herdsmen teaches us a valuable lesson: to seek a peaceful solution and find common ground in a possible conflict. Applying these principles can lead to healthier relationships, whether it's a disagreement at work, within our families, or in our communities. Our closing thought and question: conflict is inevitable in human interactions, not just within our family. Question: what did you learn about handling conflicts with others from this week's lesson? In closing, thank you for tuning in to Sunday School Lesson at a Glance. I hope this glimpse of this week's Sunday School lesson is helpful to you as you prepare to study and teach God's Word. Don't forget to click the like, share, and subscribe button. For additional information and resources, contact the Sunday School Publishing Board. Blessings to you until the next Sunday School Lesson at a Glance.
we take a glimpse into the Sunday school lesson. Subscribe now.